Good afternoon, Miss, and hello. Today, me, Armand, Josh, and Andrew will be explaining our PowerPoint presentation on chess. Now, what is chess? Well, chess is a two-player strategy board game that is being played on a 64 square arranged in an 8x8 grid. Now, to me personally, chess is one of the most popular and one of the most global games worldwide. It's very popular, and these days it's one of the most trickiest game a person could play, as it's a very difficult game to learn, but it's a very interesting and famous game. Now, basically, chess is, as I've mentioned, played in a squared board with 8 rows and 8 ranks. Now, chess have two different alternate colors, which is the black and the white. So, if I can give an example, let's say a queen. There are two types, which is the light queen, which is the white queen, and the black queen. Now, if an opponent have the black the black queen, then that opponent places it on the dark spot. But if there's a white queen, then the opponent places it on the light spot. So now, as you can see from the PowerPoint, let's take a little dive on a little bit of small history of where chess comes from. Well, chess is derived from the Indian game known as chaturanga, sorry, and it was invented around the 7th century. In that time, at the same time, in Asian countries, chess were being popularized everywhere. It was mostly popularized in Korea, China, but also it was in Indonesia, it was in Malaysia, it was getting famous everywhere in Asia. Before any other continents knew about it, Asia is where chess was basically started becoming famous. So, starting around the 9th century is where Europe started adopting the game. And during that time, also around the 15th century, that's where Spain also adopted the game. They adopted it late, and that's where it started getting famous. So Asia, Europe, and during the 19th century, they have decided to standardize the modern rules, and that's the rules that are being played in today's time, where even now many countries around the world is where chess is being played, and chess is famous everywhere due to these modern rules being played. Now people can play Now people have been using these rules since the past times, since early centuries where chess was invented. Now let's talk about some of the interesting rules and regulations that are being played and used when we play chess. Like, what are the rules and regulations we need to know in order to be able to play chess? Now, in chess there are 16 pieces. There's one king, there's one queen, there's two knights, two rooks, there are two bishops, and there are 8 pawns. Now let's go in detail of what they are. Basically, a king is where they move one square in any direction. A rook is where they can move any number of squares along a rank or a file. A bishop is where they can move any numbers of squares diagonal, diagonally, but cannot leap over pieces. A queen is where it combines the power of the rook and the bishop and can move any number of squares along the rank or file. Now the knight. The knight is where it moves any of the closest squares that are not at the same rank, file, or even diagonal. So what is the pawn? Now the pawn is where it can move forward to an unoccupied square immediately in front of the same file, or it can take advance in 2 squares along the same file. Now now basically now basically what is now basically what is the difference between all of these different pieces? Well, the queen is the highest among all. and the pause is where it's the lowest among all. So they rank differently. Now, what is the main objective of the game? So the main objective of the game is where is where the opponents target the king. Now the king is where we have to ensure that we need to be able to threaten the king, to be able to capture the king, and to be able to checkmate at the very last moment when the king is under threat. That's where we know we have officially won the game. Another objective, might I add, is where we attack the opponent's pieces by capturing the opponent's pieces and taking them, while we can support each other. So basically, it involves exchanging the pieces, which are mostly similar, and it enables so basically, if an opponent takes a piece of another opponent, it's basically an advantage. It increases the chances of the opponent to win, and it makes the opponent go one step ahead of the opposite opponent. So now I'm gonna explain about how can you win a chess game. Basically, you can either win the game or you can either draw the game. These are the two different ways how the game can end. So let me explain the winning part of the game. So in order to win the game, the opponent needs to either resign, it's either they run out of time, the opposite opponent checkmates them, or they forfeit. Well, let me explain in detail what checkmate is. Checkmate is where the player whose turn it is moves into a check and has no legal move to escape the check. And if a player forfeits, it's basically either he cheats, violates the rules, or runs out of time, or he feels that he's in a disadvantage. Some of the basic rules can include that the opponent maybe arrive late, or an example can include they receive a call or a text on the phone, or refuse to undergo a drug test. Basically, these simple rules that cannot be followed, and if the opponent is rude, then it goes on to it basically continues on being a forfeit, and it's done. So you can also win by the opponents resigning. Either they may resign or concede the game to an opponent. So another way is that an opponent can draw the game. How do they draw? They can either draw by an agreement. At most, they reach a mutual agreement between players, so they can show respect to each other. It can be based on the clock as well. It can be based on the time. So they think that if they're both at a disadvantage, they decide to reach an agreement. Another way is a stalemate, where the player whose turn it is the player whose turn it is to move has no legal move and not in check. And another type can be a threefold repetition, where this is mostly common. This is a mostly common type of agreement. This is mostly common type of a draw, where they avoid repeating move because it would incur a disadvantage. It incurs a disadvantage to both opponents, and it's not good. So that's why before the threefold repetition happens, they decide that they want to claim a draw in order to be able to reach an agreement, and neither will lose or neither will be at a disadvantage. So now, let's talk about some of the interesting features and special moves of the game. Now, these are, as you can see from the PowerPoint, these are the three most interesting features. One is the time control. Now, the time control is one of the most important parts in playing chess, because it enables it checks the time of how much a person has when they play chess. How long do they have left? If the time runs out, the opponent is at a loss and he will automatically lose the game. So they need to follow the duration time. Now, there are two types of chess games that follow very different times. Now, the classical game, the usual game that is being played, follows a 7-hour time limit. But there are other types of chess games that are playing at very different times. I can give an example through the PowerPoint. Is the bullet chess, where it takes under 3 minutes per person per player. The rapid chess is being played for 20 minutes and 2 hours per game. Now the two interesting features that is being used commonly even in today's time is known as the castling and the espaçant. Now these two features are more like basically it's an advantage tool that can be used by a person when they play an opponent to be able to get an advantage, or it would help them to win the game in an easier way, or basically, as I've mentioned, it's an advantage. Now what is castling? As I've mentioned, that a king's role is to make a special move. Now that's what castling is, like moving the king 2 squares along the first rank toward the rook. That is usually the player's first rank, and it moves back it basically moves the rook back to the last square, which can enable a king to have an advantage to just cross. Now what is the espaçant? Well, an espaçant is when a pawn makes a 2-step advance from its starting point, and there's an opponent's pawn available which is on the other side of the square next to the destination of the adjacent file. I've mentioned this when I was talking and explaining about what pawn is and what is its key role. Now, an opponent's pawn can capture the opposite pawn which was passed over, and that's why the espaçant is a very, very useful tool. Now, in chess, when people win, what are the main awards they can receive? Well, the biggest and the most prestigious title they can receive is known as the Grandmaster. This is where it was created by the world organization FEDE. This is apart from the world champion, the Grandmaster is one of the most highest prestigious title a chess player could ever attain. It's a very luxurious title, and it's being won, and it's one of the hardest titles to win in chess. Now, what are the other titles that are generally up to stake for people? It can be International Grandmaster, which is a different title. It is, or even a FIDE Master, where it's open to both men and women. The competition is both men and women instead of only men or instead of only women. So these titles enables chess players to be able to attain a prestigious prize by winning the competitions, which made chess one of the most famous competitive games in the world today. Now, Andrew will be explaining about those competitive games, as I've mentioned, where chess is being considered as a sport and playing in many competitions, and this enables them to win the prestigious titles, as I've mentioned, the Grandmaster and International Master, etc. So that's all from me. Thank you.